Imagine cruising down a peaceful suburban street on a sunny afternoon, the kind of day where nothing seems out of the ordinary. That's exactly how it started for one distinguished circuit court judge heading home after a long day serving justice in the courthouse. Little did he know, this routine drive would become a powerful story that would challenge our assumptions about law enforcement, racism, and human connection. The red and blue lights flashed in his rearview mirror, that familiar surge of anxiety rising in his chest. Even decades on the bench couldn't completely erase that feeling. As a black man who had spent his career upholding the law, he knew all too well how these situations could go wrong. He did everything by the book, hands visible on the steering wheel, calm demeanor, respectful tone. The officer approached, his face stern and unreadable. Standing at the window, he seemed surprised when the judge calmly explained his profession. But what happened next would change both their lives forever. This wasn't going to be just another traffic stop story. It was about to become something far more meaningful. What unfolded in those next few minutes on that quiet street would challenge everything we think we know about police interactions, racial profiling, and the power of honest conversation. It's a story that needs to be told, especially in today's climate where tensions between law enforcement and communities of color often dominate headlines. As the judge sat there, his heart racing despite years of courtroom experience, he couldn't have predicted how this encounter would transform not just his own perspective, but also spark a movement within his community. The officer's next words would set in motion a chain of events that would leave an indelible mark on their city's approach to community policing. This isn't your typical viral video about police encounters. There's no shouting, no violence, and no tragic ending. Instead, what happened that day became a masterclass in human understanding, showing how two people from seemingly opposite sides of a divide could break down barriers and find common ground. But before I tell you what happened next, let me take you back to the beginning of that day. The judge had just finished presiding over a case that would prove eerily relevant to what was about to unfold. In his courtroom that morning, he had dealt with a situation that would give him unique insight into the conversation he was about to have with this officer. The tension in the air was palpable as the officer leaned down to the window, his hand resting near his belt, a gesture that spoke volumes about the ingrained habits of his profession. The judge's decades of experience reading people told him something was different about this officer, but he couldn't quite put his finger on what it was. What happened in the next few minutes would not only change both their lives, but would also become a blueprint for how we might begin to heal the deep-seated wounds in our society. As the officer opened his mouth to speak, neither man knew they were about to become part of a story that would inspire thousands and show that even in the most charged situations, humanity can prevail. Stay tuned as we uncover the remarkable events that followed and discover how this seemingly routine traffic stop became a powerful lesson in breaking down prejudices and building bridges between communities. The tension hung in the air as the officer cleared his throat. "License and registration," he said, his voice carrying an unexpected note of weariness. The judge reached slowly for his documents, movements deliberate and measured, just as he taught his own children to do during traffic stops. Through the rear-view mirror, he could see another patrol car pulling up behind them, a detail that made his stomach tighten despite his years of experience with law enforcement. As he handed over his credentials, the judge noticed something in the officer's demeanor shift. Perhaps it was the gold judicial badge tucked in his wallet, or maybe it was the way he carried himself, with dignity but without arrogance. The officer's eyes widened slightly as he read the credentials, his posture straightening almost imperceptibly. But what happened next wasn't the immediate apology and dismissal you might expect. Instead, the officer paused, looked at the judge with an intensity that seemed to carry the weight of countless similar encounters, and asked a question that would set this interaction apart from any other traffic stop either man had experienced. Earlier that day in his courtroom, the judge had presided over a case involving a young police officer accused of racial profiling. The details of that case had weighed heavily on his mind throughout the day, and now, standing face to face with this officer, those morning proceedings felt almost prophetic. The second officer had now approached the passenger side, his hand casually resting on his holster, standard procedure, but a gesture that nonetheless carried decades of historical weight. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the suburban street, and somewhere in the distance, children's laughter floated on the breeze, a stark contrast to the gravity of the moment unfolding. The first officer leaned down again, his face now showing something different. Vulnerability, perhaps. "Sir," he began, his voice slightly shaky, "I think we need to have a conversation, not as a judge and an officer, but as two men who might be able to help each other understand something important." Those words hung in the air between them, heavy with possibility. The judge's years on the bench had taught him to read people, to sense when something genuine was unfolding. This wasn't going to be a typical confrontation about a minor traffic violation. This was going to be something much more significant. The conversation that followed would challenge both men's preconceptions, force them to confront uncomfortable truths, and ultimately lead to changes that would ripple through their community. But first, they had to navigate the complex dynamics of that moment. A black judge in his car, two white officers standing over him, and decades of societal tension hanging in the balance. As the first officer began to share his story, neither man could have predicted how their encounter would transform not just their own perspectives, but inspire a movement that would reach far beyond their city limits. The officer took a deep breath before speaking. "I pulled you over today because your taillight is out," he began, but that's not the whole truth. His partner shifted uncomfortably beside the car, perhaps sensing the weight of what was about to unfold. The judge sat silently, his hands still visible on the steering wheel, waiting. "I've been on the force for 15 years, the officer continued, his voice growing quieter. "And today, during briefing, we received reports about a stolen vehicle matching your car's description." He paused, the implications hanging heavy in the air. The judge knew exactly what that meant. How many times had matching description been used to justify questionable stops? But something was different about this officer's demeanor. His hands were trembling slightly as he pulled out his notebook, not to write a ticket, but to show something to the judge. Inside were detailed notes from every traffic stop he'd made in the past month, along with something unexpected, personal reflections on each interaction. The second officer had stepped back now, speaking quietly into his radio. More patrol cars were arriving, their presence drawing curious onlookers from nearby homes. The judge's heart raced as he realized this situation could easily be misinterpreted by passersby. One wrong move, one misunderstanding, and this could become exactly the kind of incident he'd spent his career trying to prevent. The first officer noticed the growing crowd too. "I know how this looks," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "But please give me 5 more minutes. There's something you need to see." He reached slowly for his patrol car's dash camera controls, his movements deliberately transparent. What he was about to show the judge would challenge everything both men thought they knew about law enforcement, racial bias, and the power of confronting uncomfortable truths. As the officer's finger hovered over the playback button, a call came through on his radio. A message that would force both men to make a decision that would reverberate through their community for years to come. The crowd of onlookers had grown larger, phones recording the scene, social media already buzzing with speculation. The judge could feel the weight of his position, his responsibility to his community, and the potential impact of whatever was about to happen next. This wasn't just about a traffic stop anymore. It had become a pivotal moment that could either deepen the divide or begin to bridge it. The officer looked at the judge, his face showing a mix of determination and vulnerability. "Before I show you this," he said, reaching for something in his patrol car, "I need to tell you about a case that changed my life last month." The judge leaned forward, recognizing in the officer's voice the same tone he'd heard countless times in his courtroom, the sound of someone about to share a truth that could change everything. The officer pulled out a worn envelope from his patrol car, hands still trembling slightly. "Last month, I pulled over a car for the same reason, matching description. Inside was a teenage boy and his father." He paused, swallowing hard. The father was also a judge, but from a different district. He was white. The crowd had grown larger, their phones recording every moment. Someone in the background shouted, "This is going live." The judge felt the weight of countless eyes on them, knowing this moment was being broadcast across social media platforms, potentially reaching millions. Just then, the dash cam footage the officer had queued up began playing automatically. But what appeared on screen wasn't from today's stop. Instead, it showed multiple traffic stops from the past month, each one revealing a pattern that made the judge's breath catch in his throat. The footage wasn't what anyone expected. It showed something far more complex and troubling than simple racial profiling. The second officer suddenly stepped forward, urgency in his voice. "Sir, we just got a call. There's something you both need to know." He held up his phone, showing a news alert that made both the judge and first officer freeze. The headline connected directly to the case the judge had presided over that morning, revealing a shocking connection that neither man could have anticipated. The crowd's murmuring grew louder as a third police car arrived, this one carrying someone both men recognized, a person whose presence would completely transform the significance of this traffic stop. Through his rearview mirror, the judge watched as the car door opened, revealing a figure that would force everyone to confront an uncomfortable truth about justice, prejudice, and the power of perception. The first officer looked at his notebook one more time, then back at the judge. "What I'm about to tell you," he said, his voice steady now, "will either end my career or change this entire department. And honestly, I'm okay with either outcome." He reached for his body camera, making sure it was recording what would become one of the most significant moments in their city's history. From the newly arrived police car stepped the judge's colleague from the morning's case, the one who'd heard the racial profiling incident. But he wasn't alone. With him was the officer's former partner, who'd left the force months ago after filing a series of internal reports about systemic discrimination within the department. The first officer's hands steadied as he held up his notebook. "For the past 6 months, I've been working undercover with internal affairs," he revealed, "documenting every traffic stop, every questionable order, every instance of profiling. Not just from others, from myself too." The dash cam footage continued playing, showing a carefully documented pattern of both conscious and unconscious bias throughout the department. The former partner stepped forward, holding a USB drive. "The case this morning wasn't coincidental," she explained. "It was the final piece we needed. We've been building a case for reform from the inside, but we needed someone with authority, someone beyond reproach, to witness it firsthand." The judge suddenly understood. His traffic stop wasn't random. They'd chosen him specifically, knowing his reputation for fairness and his influence within the judicial system. The whole scene, the second officer, the gathering crowd, the live social media coverage, had been orchestrated to ensure transparency and public accountability. But the final twist came from an unexpected source. One of the bystanders stepped forward, removing a press badge from beneath his jacket. "I'm from the Department of Justice," he announced. "And this entire operation just confirmed what we needed to launch a nationwide police reform initiative. Your department will be the model for change." The first officer turned to the judge, offering his badge. "This is bigger than a traffic stop, Your Honor. This is about changing the system from within, but we need your help to do it right." The crowd fell silent, phones still recording, as the judge reached for the badge, not to take it, but to close the officer's hand around it. "Keep it," he said. "We need good officers who are willing to fight for change." The story went viral within hours, but not for the reasons anyone expected. It wasn't about conflict or confrontation. It was about collaboration, accountability, and the courage to acknowledge and address systemic problems. The traffic stop that began with tension ended with hope, proving that real change starts with those brave enough to challenge the status quo from within. In the weeks that followed, the impact of that traffic stop rippled through the community and beyond. The judge and the officer became unlikely partners in police reform, leading workshops where law enforcement and community members could have honest conversations about bias, fear, and change. Their story wasn't just about exposing problems. It was about finding solutions together. The internal affairs investigation led to widespread departmental changes. New training programs were implemented, focusing on unconscious bias and community engagement. Body camera footage became a tool for learning rather than just accountability. Officers began keeping reflection journals, similar to the one that brave first officer had maintained. What made this story different was that it wasn't about vilifying police or ignoring real issues. Instead, it showed how courage and honesty from both sides could bridge seemingly impossible divides. The officer's willingness to confront his own biases, combined with the judge's openness to listen, created a model for meaningful reform. Social media played an unexpected role in amplifying the positive impact. The viral footage showed something rare, a moment of genuine transformation captured in real time. Comments poured in from across the country, with other departments reaching out to learn more about the reform initiative. 6 months later, the department's traffic stop statistics showed significant changes. Racial disparities in stops and searches had decreased dramatically. More importantly, community trust was growing. The judge continued his work from the bench, but now with a deeper understanding of the complexities officers face. The officer received a promotion to lead the department's new community relations unit. But perhaps the most meaningful change came from the ripple effects in everyday interactions. Other officers began having their own honest conversations about bias. Community members felt more comfortable expressing their concerns. The wall of silence that had separated police from the people they served began to crack. The Department of Justice's reform initiative spread to other cities, using this case as a blueprint for change. It wasn't perfect. Real change never is, but it was a start. A traffic stop that could have become another tragic headline instead became a turning point. As for the judge and the officer, they still meet regularly for coffee, sharing updates about the ongoing changes and planning new initiatives. Their unlikely friendship stands as a testament to what's possible when people choose courage over comfort, truth over tradition, and hope over fear. Sometimes the biggest changes start with the smallest moments of honesty. This story wasn't just about a traffic stop. It was about the power of human connection to transform systems that seem unchangeable. And it all began with two men who chose to see beyond their badges and titles to recognize their shared humanity.